In the last part, we saw how British rule first centralized power and then under pressure slowly gave Indians some limited participation. But अब कहानी gets interesting because from 1909 onwards, Indians didn't want just a seat at the table. They wanted the right to build their own table. They wanted self-rule. In this video, we'll see how this constitutional journey rapidly evolved from the controversial Morley-Minto Reforms to the blueprint of our modern constitution in the Government of India Act 1935, and finally to the birth of the Constituent Assembly. Welcome back to the Indian Constitution for UPSC and law students. मैं हूं रामवीर and this is part 2 of our historical background. So the first major milestone of 20th century was the Indian Councils Act of 1909, better known as the Morley-Minto Reforms. ये reforms क्यों आए? There were two main reasons: growing pressure from the Indian National Congress and the rise of political nationalism among Indians. Key points to remember for the exams are the size of the legislative councils, both at the center and in the provinces, was significantly increased. For the first time, it allowed Indians to be elected to these councils, marking a shift from nomination to election. Then Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join the Viceroy's executive council. This was a huge step. And this was the most critical point. The act introduced the concept of separate electorates for Muslims. अब ये पॉइंट बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. समझो कि this provision officially injected communalism into Indian politics. It was a classic divide and rule tactic, the consequences of which would haunt the subcontinent for decades. Next, we have the Government of India Act 1919, also known as the Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms. This was based on the landmark 1917 declaration by Edwin Montagu, promising the gradual development of self-governing institutions in India. The key features of this act was Dyarchy at the provincial level. So what exactly is Dyarchy? It's basically a system of double government, and provisional subjects were divided into two lists: transferred and reserved. Transferred subjects like education, health, agriculture were handled by Indian ministers who were responsible to the legislature. But reserved subjects like the real power, they say finance, law, order, justice, and police, remained firmly under the British governor's control. In short, Indians got responsibility, but without any real authority. It's like being told you can drive the car, but someone else holds the steering wheel. This act also introduced a bicameral legislature at the center for the first time, the Legislative Assembly and the Council of States, and crucially, it introduced direct elections. Though the right to vote was extremely limited, it was still introduced. Now, the 1919 Act had a provision for a review after 10 years. The review came a bit early because in 1927, in the form of the Simon Commission. But here was the problem. The commission, which was meant to decide India's political future, had no Indian member because all seven of them were British. Naturally, this was seen as a grave insult. Massive protests erupted across India with famous slogan, "Simon, go back." In response, Indian leaders decided, if you won't include us, we will draft our own constitution. This led to the Nehru Report of 1928. The Nehru Report was a visionary document. It demanded dominion status for India and a charter of fundamental rights for all citizens. The British, however, largely ignored it, paving the way for an even bigger constitutional showdown. Now this one, the Government of India Act 1935, which is extremely important. It was the longest and most detailed piece of legislation ever passed by the British for India. In fact, the framers of our very own constitution borrowed heavily from it. It is also known as blueprint of the Indian Constitution. It proposed an All India Federation, which never came into force because princely states refused to join. It abolished Dyarchy in the provinces and introduced provincial autonomy. For the first time, provinces had their own responsible governments. It established a federation court in 1937, which later became the Supreme Court of India. But the crucial catch here is the government general at the center and governors in the provinces still retained a vast overriding powers. बस यहाँ से Indians को clear हो गया. True freedom won't come through British-made reforms. It had to be won. Finally, after decades of struggle, the Quit India movement, and intense negotiations, the Indian Independence Act 1947 was passed by the British Parliament. This was the final act. This act declared India an independent and sovereign state from August 15, 1947. It provided for the creation of two independent dominions, India and Pakistan, and it empowered the constituent assemblies of both new nations to frame and adopt any constitution they pleased. British rule was over. The power to write India's destiny was finally in the Indians' hand. The body entrusted with this monumental task was the Constituent Assembly, formed in the year 1946. The first meeting held was in December 9th, 1946. Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected as its first president, and the brilliant Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was appointed as the chairman of the drafting committee. For 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days, the assembly debated every single clause, from fundamental rights to federal structure, word by word. Finally, on November 26, 1949, the Constitution of India was adopted. And on January 26, 1950, it came into the full effect. On that day, India officially became a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. So, from the Regulating Act of 1773 to the Republic Day of 1950, India's constitutional journey moved from the colonial control to the complete self-rule. Each act we discussed, 1909, 1919, and 1935, was a stepping stone. They were flawed, of course, yes, but they provided a legislative and administrative framework that ultimately led to the creation of the world's greatest democratic constitution. If this video helped you understand how India transitioned from British laws to its very own sovereign legal identity, then make sure you watch our next video, Making of the Indian Constitution. In that episode, we'll dive deep into the workings of Constituent Assembly, the debates and the challenges and the philosophy behind our constitution. So don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. Join me in the next chapter of Indian Constitution for UPSC and law students. This is Ramveer from Legality with Reality, signing off. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning. Jai Hind.